Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas, and this is Free the Rabbits. And how are all the free-range rabbits doing out there today? Before we start with this week's episode, make sure you smash the like button if you're on YouTube, subscribe, hit the notifications, and share the episode. If you're on Rumble, do the same thing. If you're on any other podcast platform, make sure you're giving a 5-star review. Make sure you're leaving a review, any place that you can do it, and share the show. That's the best way for this entire podcast to get out there, is to share the show. All right, guys, let's get into the episode. All right, guys, today we're going to start a mini series on what I'd like to call the secrets of Solomon Islands. Now, I know some of you may have heard of stories of giants coming out of the Solomon Islands, UFOs coming out of the Solomon Islands, reptilians coming out of the Solomon Islands, and generally speaking, people just hear about it in passing, like it's some sort of urban legend or something mythological. But interestingly enough, there is a guy who went to the Solomon Islands, lived there for a while, and actually wrote a book about all of these weird things that he saw while he was there, plus all of the different tribes and people of different islands in the Solomon Islands that he interviewed, and they told him all these stories, these legendary stories of these giants that still to this day, according to them, roam and rule the underworld and the inner parts of the islands of the Solomon Islands. And I know some people may have heard of the book, but if you haven't heard of the book, it's called Solomon Islands Mysteries, Accounts of Giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands. It's very, very interesting, and it's written by a guy named Marius Boirayon, and he's the son of a World War II Central France resistance leader. Now, I did some research there. I couldn't find the particular France resistance leader that he was the son of. I tried to match up his last name, Boirayon, which is Boirayon. Couldn't find anything there, but again, there was plenty of French resistance leaders during World War II, so it could have been a leader of a small group of individuals. I don't really know. That part I couldn't verify. He grew up in Mount Hagen in the Papua New Guinea Highlands. Following a career in the Royal Australian Air Force and as an aircraft helicopter engineer working in the Outback in Australia, he decided in 1995 to go to the Solomon Islands to live. Currently, he lives in Queensland, Australia. Now, there's not a whole lot else about him out there as far as what he's not telling us in the book. That's all we really know. It's like a little short bibliography that's attached to the book. But again, I did some digging, couldn't find a lot about him outside of what other people have talked about his adventures in the Solomon Islands. Now, the interesting part about the book is that a lot of the political narratives that he talks about match up. And as I go through some of these stories and how they match up to some stuff that I already know, it does make some sense. Plus, there's some odd things that surround the book as of recent. You can't buy it. Not unless you go to some sort of PDF bookstore that they have online. I know there's a few that tout that they sell it, that you can get the PDF version of it. I haven't dug enough to get to the point to buy it from one of those sites, and a lot of those are kind of sketchy, so I don't know. I did end up finding the book, though, on also a sketchy site, but it was free, so I was able to read it recently, and I read it front to end. Very interesting, and we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff over this next little mini-series that I'm doing. But the interesting thing about the book is I looked it up on Amazon to see if it was for purchase. Now, the original place that you could purchase it from on Amazon, it says it's out of stock. Indefinitely out of stock, so you can't get it. Then I saw there was a used version selling for $4,600, and a few days ago, it was at $5,500, so I noticed that they dropped the price a little bit, but it's a very expensive book to get a hold of. So apparently the people that get it, love it. I can tell you I liked it a lot. However, there are some things that I would maybe disagree with, or some things maybe don't add up. And as we go through some of these stories, I'll tell you what I think about it. But I can say that some of the things surrounding the book absolutely make sense. And the fact that this guy seems to know a whole lot about what's going on in Solomon Islands, you could tell he was there. Now, what was his agenda being there in the first place? I don't know. Maybe his story's completely true. I can tell you his worldview's a little different than mine, but he's got the right idea with some of the topics that he's going down. And I think as we delve into that over the next bit of this mini-series that we're doing, because there's going to be sections of this mini-series because the book is just massive, and it also spawns off into some things that I want to talk about and say, hey, this is what I think this could be, and we'll get into that as we go down this weird rabbit hole of the Solomon Islands mysteries, the name of the book, and I like to call the secrets of the Solomon Islands, and this character that wrote it, Marius Boirayon, who is French, and his father apparently worked for the resistance. Now, he does get into his military career a little bit. Not much. He just lets you know he worked for the military, so he never tells you exactly what he did for the military, even though he does seem to know an awful lot about how the political regimes work in the United States, in China, in Australia. He breaks that down and how that they all are connected to the Solomon Islands now, and all this strangeness coming out of the Solomon Islands. Now, he's also said to be the research director of the Solomon Anthropological Expedition Trust Board Incorporated, and one of the people involved in the investigation process on the islands regarding the true giants. The Australian-based Borean lived and worked in the Solomon Islands as a helicopter pilot and engineer. He also married a Solomon native woman, which he does talk about initially early in the book, how when he moves there because he was bored and restless in Australia and he was going to start basically an early retirement, he had a lot of money too, which begs the question how he got all this money. Now, from all indications, he was a private plane and helicopter pilot in Australia, so I'm sure that garnered him some money when he got out of the military, but we don't really know how he got his money outside of those two things. So that's an interesting part of the equation, even though he never answers that, but he did have a large sum of money. So when he decided to, hey, I just want to get up and move somewhere, because that's what he says in the book, I just was depressed, tired. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm like, you know what? It's 1995, 1996. I'm out of here. I'm going to go to the Solomon Islands, because there was an old atlas that he owned that his mother gave to him. And as he's perusing this atlas, trying to figure out where he's going to go, there's a bunch of islands circled. And his mother had put an arrow to it and said, here are the 1,000 islands. So when he saw that, he said, you know what? I'm going to go to the Solomon Islands. I'm going to go live there. it's nice to have that kind of money where I'm going to go live wherever I want to live. So again, we don't really know where he got this money from. So he goes to the Solomon Islands. He gets a driver while he's there because he doesn't know anybody in the Solomon Islands. So when he gets to the island of Guadalcanal, and again, there's 1,000 islands in the Solomon Islands, and we're going to talk about a couple as we go down this rabbit hole of all this weird strangeness that's coming out of the Solomon Islands. So he heads to the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, which is one of several islands that he ends up staying on or visiting while he's there. But there are so many things that happen on these islands that are just fascinating. So he goes to Guadalcanal first. He meets a driver named John who ends up being a really good friend of his, and he and John go on some of these adventures together throughout this book. And John also points him in the direction of certain people that know fantastic stories or have had fantastic stories that they're a part of. So he pays John to be his driver. He and John become good friends. And this is also initially where he meets Miriam, who becomes his wife, who he has a child with. Now, the book's a little wishy-washy on this because I know he has another wife in the Solomon Islands, but he never goes into the fact of any divorces or how that works. My thought pattern is maybe he had two wives at once because I know a lot of the different tribes in the Solomon Islands, as he talks about in the book, had multiple wives. But he does consider one of them to be his ex-wife, which was also interesting. But again, he doesn't go into that too much because he's more concerned with the high strangeness that's coming out of the Solomon Islands. So he meets Miriam. They end up having a child together, which is, a part of the story that carries throughout because they come with him a lot on not these adventures, but when he moves to different islands or different spots on Guadalcanal or Malaita. So again, these are two different islands, so you'll see these two islands show up very prominently as he's talking about all this weird stuff. He also starts taking these trail rides on this dirt bike that he buys, and he meets this other guy, Joseph. Joseph's very important in this story, too, because Joseph and he become good friends, too, and Joseph also goes on a lot of these journeys with him, plus points him in the direction of people who tell him stories about giants, either personal or that have been pushed down through generations. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the UFO phenomena and the reptilian phenomena that he talks about that is going on in the Solomon Islands. So it's really interesting that the UFO phenomena is so prominent on the Solomon Islands that they don't even think anything about it when they see them passing by. It happens so much. Matter of fact, most of the tribes people don't even know they're UFOs. They actually call them snakes, flying snakes. Not that they are in a snake form. However, later on, he talks about that there is this thing called a diamond snake that's an actual snake with some sort of weird diamond jewel in its head, and it floats through the forest. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the flying snakes that they talk about generally are UFOs, and they are the typical circular UFOs. So again, this whole snake idea was something that they named these flying objects, and this actually came from a man from China who during the 1930s moved into the Marivovo area and opened up a small trade store. He saw the flying balls and he named them dragon snakes, which has been passed down from the 1930s all the way to all of the islands now. Oddly enough, he died during a tsunami because he wouldn't leave his trade store. So that's a little side note, but that is where the name is said to come from. That's just what the lore that has been passed down throughout all of the islanders. So interestingly enough, Joseph helps Marius out to find a house for he and his new wife. So he tells them when they get there, hey, watch out for the dragon snake that's in the area. And he's like, what? Dragon snake? What are you even talking about? So one thing about Marion, you do know he's very adept. He knows how to fish. He knows how to hunt. He is good with weapons. The guy knows how to build. You can tell his expertise, his background. He is a tradesman of all types. So I kind of lend that to the fact he had no problem moving to the Solomon Islands where he knew absolutely nobody. He goes there, he's a white man in a place where there's generally not a lot of white people, and he marries a girl from Guadalcanal. So that was big enough as it was. Now, granted, it's not as hard as you think, and he tells the story because her father, who ended up being a chief of the tribe that she was a part of, welcomed it because he looked at him as though he had deep pockets, which he did, and he knew that, hey, my daughter marries him, then that's just me dipping into his pockets as long as I can, which he did, and he makes jokes about it throughout the entire book. Regardless, he's very adept at being able to hunt fish. So he's out fishing with Joseph, and Joseph starts yelling, "Dragon snake, dragon snake, dragon snake." And he's like, what? So he sees this bright, luminous white object flying slowly over the water. He calls out to his wife to bring the binoculars, and he focuses on it, and he said it's like a star. It was brightly lit, and it was about 60 foot around, and it made no noise. They watched it for a few minutes, and it submersed back into the sea. So this goes back to the thought pattern that a lot of these UFOs are not coming from above. They're coming from underneath the earth, underneath the sea. All of these weird spaces throughout the sea that we don't even know about because we know very little about the ocean. But there have been, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of reports, Navy ships seeing these things come out of the water. So you're going to find this a big theme in this book. You're going to find what Marius has to talk about in this book as very, very interesting because to him, everything comes from underneath. He never talks about things coming from the sky. However, he does believe in a globe system and he does believe in space. So if you're not on board with that, just focus in on the part that it's coming from underneath the earth, which I find fascinating. And he talks about all of these cave systems, all of these underground tunnels that actually connect the islands that all of these things are coming out of. So he sees it submersed back under there and he's blown away. Now, they think it's something biological on the island, the Solomon Islanders. He already knows what UFOs are. He even talks about it. He talks about Area 51. He mentions that. He just knows that there are these things called UFOs. Now, granted, he's been in the military, so he probably had an idea of what UFOs were, if not maybe seen some before, at least in pictures or on television programs, to where when he saw that, he immediately knew. So he explains to Joseph and a couple of the other guys there, hey, this is what's called an unidentified flying object. So now they're a little bit more hip to the idea of, oh, okay. So this starts this whole series of investigations where he starts digging into these subterranean species, unknown to modern man, that live underneath Guadalcanal and Malaita. And he said that a lot of them are hidden to the eye, these subterrestrials. And he said that they have displayed nothing but unacceptable, unfriendly behavior towards the Guadalcanal and Malaitan people. Nothing good's come out of it. So this kind of goes back to that part where I've always said that extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials or, like he says, subterrestrials, generally there's never anything good coming out of these guys. I know people want to argue that do CE5, that talk to these entities and say that they're good, they're pointing them in the right direction. Generally speaking, even those people end up on the wrong end of the stick. They may be deceptive at first, but I would say even in most cases, they're not even deceptive at first. They are coming to abduct you, to hurt you, to cause strife, whatever they're there to do. He says that that's all they're there to do. And he said from all indications from everybody on the Solomon Islands, this is what they've been doing. So over the next few weeks, he sees them 3 more times and he's blown away every time. He's like, what's really going on here? I got to figure this out. And he starts asking locals about it. They start telling him more stories about what these UFOs have done to them. So part of the reason they call them these dragon snakes, these flying snakes, is they said they have red eyes and they can incinerate them or burn them, because there's been stories on Guadalcanal and Malaita and some of the other islands where these UFOs are basically burning them with some sort of technology, and they think it's biological. So that's why they're calling them these dragon snakes, these flying snakes. So he begins to question, why are these UFOs coming out of the rainforest, flying out to the sea, and then dropping into the sea? He needs to understand that part of it, because he's not seeing them come out of the sea so much as they're coming from somewhere on the island and then going underneath the ocean. Well, he realizes that in front of the village where he's at was where the Allied forces encountered a Japanese fleet in a great naval battle that resulted in the biggest loss of Allied ships during any naval engagement in World War II. Two of Australia's heavy cruisers, the HMAS Canberra and the USS Chicago, which was an American cruiser, had gone down there in this battle. This is where these UFOs were going. So he starts asking the question, are they going down there for gunpowder? Are they going down there for some other purpose? That starts keying him off that there may be an agenda here with these UFOs, because they keep submersing under this area where these two ships went down during World War II. And just a side note, that part of World War II was called the Solomon Islands Campaign, and it was a major campaign of the Pacific War of World War II. The campaign began with Japanese landings and capture of several areas in the British Solomon Islands and Bougainville in the territory of New Guinea during the first 6 months of 1942. The Japanese occupied these locations and began the construction of several naval and air bases with the goals of protecting the flank of the Japanese offensive in New Guinea. So Solomon Islands aren't that far away from Japan. We know Japan's part in World War II. And I bring up Japan for a reason, because they're going to have a part with these reptilians I'm about to bring up here in a second that he discovers. But one of the things about these Japanese on the island, they disperse from where they were setting up in this particular area, and nobody knows that when the Allied forces showed up, why these Japanese were gone. It didn't make any sense from a strategic standpoint, because they had all the advantage. They were there first, but the Allied forces show up, they're gone in this particular area I'm going to talk about here in a second, and they were deep in the rainforest. Now, the thought pattern is, according to Marius, was that they ran into the giants that were there, they ran into these UFOs that were there, and these reptilians, which were said to be there. So there was a statue. It was a Japanese war memorial of the Solomon Islands located at Mount Austin overlooking Honiara, which would have been the only one of its type in the world. Most war memorials he came across have something to do with soldiers, guns, and dead people, but not this one. It's about 30 by 10 meters in an open air area with an imported marble pebble floor. Now, the only writing to be found, which is about the famous Japanese sculptor, is at the base of the bronze statue of a half-human man with scales, who is holding a ray gun-style object that is attached to the end of his tail, which is crazy. So he says it's a futuristic Star Trek-type reptilian half-human. That is this statue that was made as a Japanese war memorial of the Solomon Islands. So this is the area where the Japanese were supposed to be waiting for these Allied forces and just disappeared magically. So in his line of thinking, he's saying that this particular statue that, again, was replaced with another statue of an actual man, he said that this statue was a reptilian. And why did they make this reptilian statue a memorial to what happened on the Solomon Islands? Now, I'm going to show the picture here in a second. I found this low-grade picture of what it's supposed to be. Now, I'm going to explain something about that. So there's a guy that came along that wanted to dispute Marius's findings on this particular statue. Marius had a picture of this statue up on his website, thesolomongiants.com. By the way, thesolomongiants.com no longer exists. It's been pulled from the internet. I don't know how long it's been pulled from the internet, but I went there. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just like a blank, hey, you could probably purchase this URL, right? So I go there, and this particular guy, he wrote this back in 2010. He's trying to dispute this picture, so he tags the website, which I'd already went to the website before that, but I noticed that he tagged the website. So he says that he got access from Marius to the high-resolution picture of it. But he posts up the low resolution picture of it, which I'm going to post up here on YouTube and Rumble. As you can tell, it's hard to tell. I can't tell if it's a reptilian or not. He's saying it's not. He said, I looked at the high resolution photo and it is a man. It is not a reptilian. But then he goes on to say that I have not been given permission to post this high resolution photo, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm not going to show you. But hey, it's not actually a reptilian, but I'm going to show you these low resolution photos because there's two of them. There's one with it knocked over too, I guess when they were going to replace it. And I'll show that here too. It's interesting. He shows this low resolution photo, says it's not real, that it's just a man. But again, Marius says that it's a man with reptilian scales and a tail, which we really can't tell from the photos. Like, I can't tell if there's a tail there or not. I can't tell if the tail's holding a gun like he says that it is. Regardless of the fact, it's interesting that he's saying that, hey, I took these pictures of this reptilian whose gun is pointing to this Mount Dragon, which we're going to talk about here in a second, where these UFOs are coming out of. And then you got this other guy that pops up who tries to discredit him with low-resolution photos. He has the high-resolution one, but he says he can't do it because he didn't want to drag Marius through the dirt, but yet he's doing it anyway. It makes no sense. And it kind of lends more to what Marius is saying here, that, hey, this might have been a reptilian. Maybe he saw what he saw, and maybe this guy's like, he saw the high-resolution version of it because Marius sent it to him. He even says that he did. And he's like, oh, I'm not going to post that. It proves his point. I don't want people to know that there are reptilians on the island, or at least the statue of a reptilian, which is super odd. That would be a World War II monument, a Japanese World War II monument. Very interesting stuff, but it lends to the credence that Marius says that there are reptilians on the island. Now, outside of this, and outside of some of his supposition of that they are subterrestrials, there isn't a whole lot in this book about reptilians. There's more about giants, more about UFOs that are going on in this book than the actual reptilians. However, he says that he believes they're there, and he thinks that they definitely met the Japanese during that first initial run of the Japanese, because that's when they got there first. Now, they did have battles with the Allied forces. That's known. We just know about the two ships that got sunk by the Japanese. But this was when they first got there, and the Allied forces showed up, and they weren't there anymore. And why weren't they there anymore? Then all of a sudden, this weird monument pops up that eventually gets pulled down after, by the way, Marius put a lot of this stuff out there. So Marius figures out where these UFOs, the direction that they're coming in. And Joseph talks to him and talks to some other people on the island, and they figure out that it's coming from this mountain. Now, Marius says to get to this Mount Dragon, which, by the way, he named himself because the mountain had no name to it. So that was his name that he named this mountain, because this is where these dragon snakes were coming out of. He says that it's as the crow flies from his location where he lives to this mountain. Now, when they get, it's about, I think he said 5 kilometers from where he's at. Now, again, that might not sound like a huge distance, but when we're considering rainforest, we're considering how he had to go down a 4,000-foot valley by this little river and then go up a 4,000-foot mountain to get to the top of it, or at least get to where they could eye where possibly these UFOs are coming out of. It was a big hike, and they've got all these wild pigs out there that'll kill you. Who knows what else is out there? And he hasn't even gotten to the giant part of the story yet. He's only heard little whispers of giants at this point in the story, right? So he and Joseph decide to go. They almost die a couple times there because it's tough. It's tough trekking. Marius almost falls off the mountain when they're climbing up, and Joseph grabs him. But they get to the top, and they're going to wait till nightfall. Now, there is a waterfall lake that's slightly further away by the time they get up there, and it's the size of a football field. Now, around 9:45 p.m. is when they saw the lake start glowing, and one of the UFOs comes out of the lake, shoots all the way out, hits a 45-degree angle, no sound, and disappears. Then, almost 2 hours later, another one comes out. So at this point, he realizes, whoa, wait a minute. It's not just one. It's two that are in here. So this one shoots off. Then the other one that left first comes back, drops back down in the lake, disappears, and the other one never comes back. So at this point, he's blown away. He's not really sure what to do with all this information at this point. So he does actually write about some of this in this Nexus magazine, which is an Australian magazine in 2003. And this is about the time he started that www.thesolomongiants.com, which doesn't exist anymore. And this is before he wrote this book too. So he was already putting this information out there on the internet to let people know about it and getting people to write back about some of their stories if they went to the Solomon Islands. So it's very interesting that he did put this out there about this particular incident, about this dragon snake or dragon snakes at this point, that he figures out that, wait a minute, there's more than one of these in this area. And as he starts going around all these different islands, he realizes there are absolutely hundreds of them coming out of these cave systems. A lot of them look very different than other ones. Some of them are even seen, and we'll talk about the story in a second, where there are small beings, humanoid beings that come out of the ships. So we do know that that gray alien part exists with these UFOs because of what some of these islanders have seen. So to the story that he hears from these three Malaitan teenagers of the coastal villages when he's in Malaita, they tell him that they're out fishing, they're out hunting, they see one of these diamond snakes flying over them. So he said, okay, let me go check out and see what this thing's doing, even though that the villagers have told them not to do that. I mean, they're teenagers, they're going to do what they want to do. So they follow this thing. It drops down into the tree line into the rainforest. They creep up on it. They see these three small beings playing with this like glowing rock, and they're blown away with what this glowing rock could possibly be. Well, the three beings leave the glowing rock. They get back on the ship, the UFO, and take off. So the kids, being kids, they steal the rock. They run out of the rainforest. They hide it in a tree, and something dawns on them, and they were like, well, what if they know that it's gone? And no quicker did they say that than this UFO comes flying down out of the tree line, and they run and hide, and with some sort of technology pulls the glowing rock or stone out of this tree and back onto the ship, and then takes off. So, of course, they come back and tell the villagers. I'm sure they got scolded by their family. But that's the story that was relayed to Marius. So Marius is pretty blown away with this. He said, okay, so we got this diamond snake, this UFO, that has some sort of connection to something geological in the area. And that's when he starts digging into what geologically could they possibly be after. So we won't get into this part of the story until the next part, because it's a little more connected to the giants, because it's how he finds out more about the giants. But he's also digging around for gemstones while he's in the Solomon Islands. As a matter of fact, they said that in certain places in the Solomon Islands, the gemstones are like rocks on the ground. You got sapphires, rubies, diamonds in some areas. It's really crazy, but it's not mined. There's nobody trying to do anything with these gems, and I'll get into the reasons why, but I just wanted to bring that up because of this connectivity to this stone that they find. So as Marius is digging around for stones that he's going to send back to Australia to let them know that, hey, you guys could come here, mine for gems. It would help the economy out for the Solomon Islanders, which he's already talked to them about, some of their prime ministers, and they were all for it. As he's digging around for these gemstones, he finds a perfectly round gemstone that qualified experts could not identify. 8 of them could not identify when he brought it back to Australia. He said it was incredible. The characteristics were that its specific gravity was far higher than that of diamonds, and its refractive index was also far greater than anything they had seen. Incredibly, after measuring it with a micrometer, this extraordinary gemstone was also perfectly round to within thousandths of an inch. Even though it was 32.4 carat, it was far smaller than if it were a diamond. He said another interesting thing about this unique stone was that when you held it up to the sunlight, you saw your reflection in its center. And another strange feature was when he shone a small laser into it, although translucent, it completely absorbed the light. And without destructive testing, 8 gemologists could not identify its elementary composition and said that more than likely it would have something in it that was unidentifiable. And unironically says they actually named the rock E.T. So this particular stone that he found is also, interestingly enough, connected to these UFOs, because he's thinking in his mind. This is him theorizing, and just all the stories that he's gotten from the Solomon Islanders, all the eyewitnesses he's talked to, all the eyewitness accounts he's personally had, that perhaps these subterranean extraterrestrial species are mining some rare gemstones that have rare properties that they can use to either power their ships or for weaponry or a multitude of other things. That's why that they're underneath the earth right now, because of this. And it makes sense. That part of the story makes a lot of sense to me, because he's finding stones that our geologists can't even track, according to him. Now, again, this is his report, and I will talk about some things that I don't necessarily agree with what he's saying as we get into some of the giant stories and as we get further into what he thinks is going on the island. But I find it fascinating that there's this weird stone that these, for all intents and purposes, greys, these humanoids, are playing with. It's glowing. They leave. These, Malaitan kids steal. It gets sucked back up into a ship. And then here's Marius. He finds a stone as a part of this research he's doing on gems in the area, and nobody knows what it is. I just thought that was mind-blowing to me, because I thought that was probably one of the most telling things about the UFO part of this story, about why they would be underneath the earth. Now, the giants, when we get to that part, they don't seem to be connected to this gem part of the story. As a matter of fact, they seem to be, from all purposes, what we would consider ancient Nephilim to be, like cannibalistic, very violent. However, there are some good giants that show up in these stories that they talk about. However, few and far between. And I think that also lends to this good Nephilim theory that I've been building on the past year and a half, that the majority of these giants are generally bad or evil. It's just their makeup, their DNA, but it doesn't mean that there aren't ones that can't break free of that particular DNA construction. And I think that, especially as he's breaking down these stories, he talks about there being some really upper tier good giants on the island that are battling with some of these evil forces that are going on underneath the earth. But the reason why that they're there in this particular area, maybe it's because that these Solomon Islanders have referred to the ancient name for the Solomon Islands is Mu. And there's a sect of giants, and we'll talk about them in another part, but they're also called Mu. And Marius connects the two. He said, well, there has to be something there, that these giants are called Mu. This place is called Mu. Now, he never breaks down the Mu part of it. And I knew, just from research I've done in the past, that Mu is a lost continent. It was first introduced by Augustus Le Plongeon, who identified the land of Mu with Atlantis. So I knew that the name that was floating around, since the early 1800s, Mu was the lost land of Atlantis. Also, it was connected with the land of Lemuria, which James Churchward brought about in the mid-1800s. And both of those names are generally connected as the same place, but they're both connected to Atlantis. So now we have this Mu. The islanders all say that the ancient name for the Solomon Islands is Mu. The islands as a collective. But we also know that islands in the Solomon Islands have sunk. So what if this Mu was collectively the Solomon Islands, maybe the main hub, sunk in some sort of battle or whatever else, if you want to go down the Atlantis route, which we definitely don't have time to do today. But what if these giants are derivative of that ancient land of Atlantis? What if the technology that powered this Mu was off of some sort of these stones that are underneath the earth that they're mining? I mean, listen, we know of UFOs going in and out of the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky. We know that they're all indications they're mining there. All of these deep places around the earth is where we see these UFOs coming out of. So they're going down there for something, not just to have a civilization or hide, which I think is possible too. But I think they're mining for something down there, something that we don't have access to as regular old local Joes. I think maybe behind the scenes, there's some government organizations that know what this stuff is and probably have it. And maybe it's a way to have natural power, but obviously they don't want us to have that. And we know the battle between, people that have discovered things over the years that could give us some sort of electrical power outside of the current setup that we have now, which obviously digs into our wallets and pockets, which they don't want us to have. But again, I don't think it's just that, right? I think that these gems or whatever else is down there that we don't know about do a multitude of things that could probably help us out. But obviously, these people in positions of power don't want us to have access to it. And maybe they're in league, which I think if you're going to go down the rabbit hole of these subterrestrials, they're probably in league with them in some way or have a pact or whatever else. And Marius does go down that particular line of thinking throughout the book. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the series. But I thought that was very interesting. This Mu connected to the Solomon Islands is another name for Atlantis. So what if Atlantis isn't in some of the places that we thought that it was? Because Mu is said to be in the Pacific Islands. We know that the Solomon Islands are in where? The Pacific Islands. We know that. So I don't think it's that much of a stretch to go down that line of thinking to say that this Atlantis could have been, just theorizing here, a part of the Solomon Islands. Now, he even talks more about the Malaitans and the people from Guadalcanal, and they've been observing these dragon snakes, these diamond snakes for centuries, and it's never been good. All they do is injure people, kill them. One story that he talked about when he went to this one village, this guy literally gets hit and fried by one. He talked to the kid whose grandfather was the one that got fried by one and just essentially incinerated by this dragon snake or this diamond snake in the area. Also, there's another crazy story that happens while Marius is there in Guadalcanal. So there's a guy who's out fishing and gets hit by one of these UFOs. It's floating over him. And again, the people of Solomon Islands see them all the time. They're cautious of them, obviously, but they're generally just flying above them, flying around. They don't think much about it. And to them, it's biological, right? It's back to that whole biological piece. They don't think it's a piece of technology, even though Marius, who's seen them up close and personal, and he said, no, that's a piece of technology that doesn't look biological to me. And the way that they operate is very ship-like. So this one guy is out on this boat, and he is fishing, and he sees this thing coming, but it's slowing up. So he's like, I got to get out of here. So this thing hits him with some sort of ray or something. Part of him is burned. The ship gets hit. He's getting out of there. And this thing basically floats over him. And this is the crazy part of the story. He starts to pray to God. Now, back to, there are also a lot of Christians on this island. A lot of Catholics came in the area, set up churches. Anglican churches were set up there too. So this guy is a Christian and he prays to God and this thing leaves. So this also lends to the fact that when you're praying to Yeshua and you're praying to God and these things leave, what is that part of the element that exists, right? Listen, you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to buy any of this. But say that you do think that these UFOs exist. What is the reasoning why when the name of Jesus is used or the name of Yeshua or Jehovah's used against these things, they get up and leave? It left him. And the guy ended up living too. That's the crazy part about it. They actually went and visited him in the hospital, Marius and Joseph did, and they talked to him and he told him exactly what happened. He said, yeah, I prayed and it left and I was able to get to help. And so that's why I'm still alive now. So I thought that was a really cool part of the story that tied some other threads that I've been putting together on what these UFOs could possibly be. Now, people that have followed me for a while know that I think that not all, but I think the ones that we see a lot of, these greys, these reptilians, I'm not saying that they aren't biological, but I'm saying there's some sort of demonic element to these things. You don't really hear of anything good coming out of them. I want someone to tell me of something good coming out of them that's long-term, not, hey, I saw it a couple times and it gave me some knowledge and gave me some power, and then at some point something goes terribly awry, and you've seen it time and time again. And I think that there is this correlation of evil that is coming from this technology. And I'm not saying all technology is bad by any stretch. And I think I said it on a couple other episodes before this one, that I think that angelic technology is just angelic technology. There's good and bad angels that use technology. So if we're going to go down that route of ancient technologies and angel technologies and all that, we have to be open to the fact that everything's not evil, that there's also a good part of it too. But I would say that in these particular cases, with these types of UFOs, with these types of gray entities, with these reptilians, that you're seeing things evil way more often than not. And I believe that's at least my take on it. Marius starts making some connections between these governments and the Solomon Islands UFO and subterrestrial agenda, right? He starts breaking it down how he thinks that it's all connected. Now, at the end of this series, I will talk about what he thinks and then what I think about that part of it. But I did want to bring this up because we were talking about how would the governments have found out a long time ago about this, and he does bring up this particular geologist. He calls him Mr. Grover. He was making expeditions into Central East Malaita between 1958 and 1960 and first saw balls of light UFOs flying around, reporting these sightings back to England, the ruling colonial power of the Solomon Islands at the time. A year later, this is even more nuts, in 1961, a white man who claimed he was from NASA came to that part of the island and asked for assistance from some of the islanders to take him to UFO entrances, which they did. He requested privacy. They left him on a deserted coast near a particular newfound UFO base. The NASA guy, and Marius also says he might not even work for NASA, whoever he was, he disappeared for a week, and he said that he apparently made contact with these subterranean extraterrestrials, and he doesn't know the details, but he knows that the NASA guy came back and reported back to his people what it was. They don't know exactly what he said. So we do know that early on, this British geologist, Mr. Grover, which, by the way, this was one of the very varying things that I looked up that I wasn't really too sold on. So I tried to look up a Mr. Grover, Gropher. I couldn't find anything during that period of time during the British Solomon Islands, but I did find a Mr. Grover, a J.C. Grover, that was doing geological records in the Solomon Islands during that time that he said, and this is in the Australian National University Archives, that he was over there doing these geological tests and was bringing them back to the British. So I don't know if he's using a code name here because he never uses his first name and he uses Grover, or if Grover actually exists and he's just a name that he knew about and he's not revealing to anybody else. And this was something that was given to the Islanders because the Islanders also kept documents that Marius, and throughout this book, he goes to these libraries and digs up all these documents that a lot of these Islanders don't even know exist anymore, which, by the way, he talks to Joseph at one point and Joseph tells him about these Greys. Well, he mentions what they look like. And he said, oh, yeah, we know about those. We don't call them that, though. And he takes him to one of these libraries and he goes into the library and this guy did all these eyewitness reports with the Islanders about what they look like and drew the pictures of them. And they literally were all gray aliens, reptilians. They look exactly what we think they look like. And when Marius was going through it, because this is stuff that he's seen, at least in science fiction, or at least in, what people have said they've seen that's been real. He said, man, this is nuts. And he said, they don't know anything about Area 51. They don't know anything about UFOs. They know nothing about the stuff, but yet they're seeing the same stuff here that other people are saying that they're seeing all across the world when they're being abducted or when they see some sort of UFO ship. So I thought that was really interesting too, that Marius did some deep diving while he was there. But this, back to the Grover thing, I don't know about that. I can't buy it 100% because I can't find him anywhere in any documents. But again, I did look up the Australian National University archives, and I found a J.C. Grover who was there at the same time. He was doing the same thing. So I don't know if he used that as a way to cover the name up. Maybe he knows the guy. Maybe he didn't know the guy. Maybe he was told not to say it. I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting. And the NASA guy showing up, which, by the way, we don't even know if the guy worked for NASA or not. We just know that that's what he told the islanders. Maybe they get access to these underground bases, which was told to Marius when he was there. All right, guys, this ends this week's episode. I am doing this in parts because this Solomon Island adventure, the secrets of the Solomon Islands, is going to be a very intense journey as we start delving into the giant aspect of it, how the giants might also be connected to the UFOs. I think this is going to be a fascinating trek for us, and we get to hear what Marius thinks it all is at the end, and then I'll give you what I think too. But I think this has just been a great episode. It's stuff I love to look into. And honestly, I get jealous reading Marius's accounts because I want to be in the Solomon Islands. I want to be out there trekking, chasing down these diamond snakes, these dragon snakes, these giants. I think that would be a blast. Before we get out of here, though, guys, I do want to read a few comments. I do that at the end of every episode. So we're going to read a couple off of Apple Podcasts. You guys have been killing it, by the way. Thank you so much for the 5 stars. They've been flying up on all platforms. Please continue to do that. If you're listening right now and you like what you're hearing, go give a 5-star review. Go write a review. Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. Go leave a comment on YouTube. Go leave a comment on Rumble. Like, subscribe, share, all the good stuff. So we've got Tama Drama here on Apple Podcasts. Great podcast with unique, credible perspectives on controversial biblical topics and hermeneutics. Would highly recommend. Appreciate that so much, Tama Drama. Loving this podcast, Mark Divinus. So far, so good. Really loving these first few episodes. Thank you there, Mark. We got C. Howard 13, wonderfully inquisitive. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if back in those early 2000s you hadn't accepted those burned Fat Man DVDs from that purple-haired weirdo in the Misfits t-shirt down at the PV park? Anywho, love the show. That was pretty funny. Appreciate that, guys. I'm going to read a couple off of YouTube before we get out of here. We've got Lionel Talley, 2009. The fiery Ophanim sounds like Ezekiel's wheels within wheels. The spelling is Ophanim, just so you know, and not to discredit what you wrote, and I really appreciate it, but it's Ophanim. And yes, it would be considered Ezekiel's wheels within wheels. That is the exact thing what an Ophanim is, because the Ophanim were said to be the wheels on God's throne, as well as being able to do all kinds of things. They had eyes on every bit of the spokes of the wheels, according to the Bible, which I think is interesting. We've got Gilbert Berger 7234. The no Diddy comment at the end was funny. Appreciate that. I'm glad somebody caught that comment. We got Deacon Bean. Love this incredible contribution. Great analysis. Thank you. Thank you, Deacon Bean. I really appreciate it. Guys, I really appreciate it again. This is going to be a fun little mini-series as we delve into the secrets of the Solomon Islands. Guys, on the way out, we're going to play my single off of Sasquatch and the Missing Man documentary, which I'm also a part of. You can go purchase now at merkelfilms.com. It's called Missing. All right, guys, go touch grass and get your tail out the hole.
Thought my old motto was a VA. I was working 4 cylinders to death. Put it on me, no teammate. Dreams running on fumes, no rest. You could bargain for my soul for a mention and a couple billboards, no less. Yeah, thank God for a couple roadblocks. I don't know if I'd have stopped where the road ends. Spent years looking for the real me, always came up missing. Yeah, tried to find it at the bottom of the bottle, and I promise ain't sipping. I thought I was flying, yeah. Using darkness for my lighting, missing with the timing. Spent years looking for the real me, always came up missing, yeah. Tried to find it at the bottom of the bottle, and I promise ain't sipping, yeah. Drowning in my vices, I thought I was flying, yeah. Using darkness for my lighting, missing with the timing. Spent so many years on the sidelines, trying to be the highlight, right under the bright lights, breaking all the guidelines, yeah. Missed the boat with no lifelines, yeah. Screaming I don't need you, fighting but I'm free to, neon lights lights make a path on my breath like smoke in the cold every weekend. It's been years looking for the real me, always came up missing, yeah. Try to find it at the bottom of the bottle and I promise ain't sipping, yeah. Drowning in my vices, I thought I was flying, yeah. Using darkness for my lighting, missing with the timing. It's been years looking for the real me, always came up missing, yeah. Try to find it at the bottom of the bottle and I promise ain't sipping, yeah. Drowning in my vices, I thought I was flying, yeah. Using darkness for my lighting, messing with the timing.